Don't talk to strangers. Don't play on the train tracks. Don't eat the yellow snow. These are phrases parents often tell their kids as common sense safety messages. You can probably think of dozens of others. But one that may not come immediately to mind is don't ride your bike near the highway. The reason is that, at least in the US, there are usually pretty significant distances between highways and the areas where people would want to ride a bike. The two just don't intersect very often. But what about when they do? Can that be done safely? Would anyone in their right mind want to ride near a highway interchange? Let's explore on this episode of Point to Point. Before I share some footage of my bike trip to a highway in Chicago, wow, that sounds weird, I'm going to show you the range of bike lane highway interchanges across the country, including a couple decent examples and a few truly horrendous ones. Not surprisingly, the most bike-friendly example I could find is from the cycling mecca of Portland, Oregon. This bike lane not only intersects the highway, but actually runs in the middle of Interstate 205 as it crosses the Columbia River. This is right near the Portland Airport, one of the few major city airports that you can reasonably access with a bike. Down the river is another solid option, with a grade-separated bike path under and around Interstate 5. It too has safe, separate lanes across the river, this time alongside the highway rather than in the middle of it. The other end of the spectrum is a pretty scary combination for someone on a bike. Here's one example in Indianapolis, with a skinny, unprotected lane dangerously joining multiple lanes of traffic and cutting across entrance ramps and exit ramps. Drivers laugh at that tiny bit of green paint, most of it worn off anyway. Sadly, this is not as bad as it gets. Worse, and also in Indianapolis, is this even busier interchange. 3 lanes of traffic in each direction, multi-lane turn lanes, high-speed off-ramps, and a bit of green paint squeezed in between. Or maybe the essence of green paint in some sections. You would have to be a little crazy to ride here. Better to go out of your way for the Monon Trail or Fall Creek Trail, both which travel under the highway, far away from interchanges. And no, I'm not picking on Indianapolis. Here's an example from Burlington, Vermont. Maybe the paint is a little better, and there are designated crossings at the exit and entrance ramps, but it's still pretty bad. Even Portland has a couple of its own bad examples. Portland has a solid bike grid generally, so I guess the focus was on connecting as much of the grid as possible. But by throwing bike lanes across every highway interchange, you end up with some unsafe setups for bikes. This is practically Indianapolis level. In some situations, it looks like city planners are trying to make improvements, like this interchange where some bike lane protection and signaled lane crossings were added. I'm not going to lie though, Portland, where some of the best bike infrastructure in the US can be found, also has more of these sketchy highway interchange bike lanes than just about anywhere. Now that I have your expectations calibrated appropriately, let me share with you my experience with one particular intersection in Chicago that recently saw some bike lane enhancements. It's on Chicago's northwest side, where Belmont Avenue, running east and west, intersects with I-90 and 94, also known as Kennedy. Take a look at how this interchange was laid out 3 years ago. No bike infrastructure whatsoever. An area completely dedicated to cars, which makes sense because, it's a highway interchange. So why are we building bike lanes near highways in the first place? Aren't there better places to invest precious public resources? Those were, in fact, my initial thoughts. This just seemed dumb. But then, when you look at the map, you start to notice the physical barriers that prevent parts of the city from being connected to other parts. If you watched my Bloomingdale Trail video, you'll recall that this rail trail came to a dead end as it met all 3 of Chicago's primary barriers: the highway, the railroad, and the river. The only east-west streets that cross all 3 obstacles are primary collectors at half-mile intervals. Belmont is one of these streets, and while it was far from an ideal street for adding a bike lane, it was better than most other options. Notice that bikes were using this Belmont route even before the improvements, given the lack of better options. Further south, the Bloomingdale Trail will eventually connect with the Dickens Greenway, providing a decent route all the way to the lakefront. Check my video on that project as well. But that crossing is roughly 3 miles away from the one on Belmont, so it made sense to build another path of accessibility for the northwest side. In addition, the Belmont project connects to protected bike lanes east and to the School and Roscoe Greenways, offering another path all the way to the lake. Okay, enough talk. Time for me to show you what this intersection looks like in action. First, here's the approach from the west. You're in a protected bike lane to start, but you can see those signs for the highway entrance. You want to be aware of cars coming from behind and taking that turn with some speed. Yeah, it definitely gets dark under the highway, but once you're under here, the signage and signals are pretty straightforward, and the protection is decent. I mean, considering you're traveling under 10 lanes of traffic and past a separate cross street and exit ramp, it's not bad. You connect to the Belmont protected lanes, which take you up and over the river. Then you can choose a variety of quieter neighborhood lanes from there. Coming back in the other direction, the underpass gets a little more confusing and a little less protected. Cars can turn right from Belmont onto Kedzie, but cars exiting the highway north can also shoot across Belmont straight to Kedzie. To keep bikers safe, there's this interesting hitch in the lane, a place to pause for vehicles. Then there's a separate pedestrian and bike island before the lane continues across Kedzie. At this point, it actually has grade separation up on the sidewalk momentarily, then it flows back into the street as a protected bike lane. Don't get too comfortable here, though. At Kimball, a block later, the lane just abruptly comes to an end. Maybe the Belmont bike lane will eventually extend west to connect with Milwaukee. We'll see. I've talked a lot about Belmont so far, but there's actually one more bike lane to discuss, and that's the north-south one on Kedzie. If you're heading east toward the highway but turn just before you get there, you follow this little block of Avondale Avenue straight to Kedzie south, and the entire thing is protected. Most of it's protected all the way down to Logan Square, a vibrant neighborhood with restaurants, shopping, a bit of construction while I was there, and of course the neighborhood's namesake square itself. The Belmont lanes and the connection under and along the highway make this entire area more accessible by bike. Let's head back up Kedzie to make another pass under the highway because I just can't get enough of that dark and dungeon-like space. The bike lane here works pretty well with decent protection, slicing through that safety island again. Kedzie is a pretty good north-south bike route with a bike lane in some form continuing for several miles north. It's mostly unprotected, but that's your typical Chicago bike lane. Once I hit the unprotected part, I made a quick side trip over to the Addison intersection with the highway, the next intersection north from Belmont. Here the street goes over the highway, which would have improved visibility for a possible bike lane here. However, the street is much busier, with multiple lanes in each direction and lots of commercial traffic. The entrance and exit ramps are all clumped together, adding to the congestion and overall traffic. Belmont was the right call despite its darkness. Returning to Kedzie, we have one last pass under the highway to make. Of course, you could stop at Revolution Brewing just north of the intersection if you're into that sort of thing. Just saying. On this particular day, I stayed focused on my task at hand, which was fortunate because of a few obstacles ahead, even in my so-called protected lane. First, I had to dodge two bikes swimming upstream. Then I avoided a car parked right in the middle of the lane. It was a good reminder that even when bike lanes are designed to prioritize space for bikes, you still have to watch out for all road users. Speaking of watching out, my biggest complaint about the bike lane improvements is the lack of visibility. It was a bright afternoon when I took this footage, so the areas under the highway appear especially dark in comparison. However, I've been through this underpass at other times and in other light, and it's always kind of gloomy. I think what the city needs to do to complete this project is add some better lights. I'm talking some obnoxiously bright lights, giving drivers the best chance to see bikers using the road. Or else some sensors that bikes can activate, causing lights to flash, and alerting drivers to the presence of bikes. Do you have any ideas for how to make this type of bike lane highway intersection safer and better for all users? Or do you know of other intersections where bike lanes and highways live in peace and harmony? Or examples even worse than the ones I shared? Let me know in the comments. Hey, if you made it this far in the video, consider subscribing or sharing this video with a friend. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you next time.